Leadership League Masterclass on Leadership is not a new skill. So why are we getting it so wrong? I'm Shashi from People Matters and would take you through the agenda for today's masterclass. First of all, I would like to give you a brief on L&D Leadership League. L&D Leadership League is an initiative which is specially designed for the L&D leaders, helping them take talent management to the next level. This league is a combination of bunch of activities like the newsletters, masterclasses, learning weeks, half-day events, full-day conference and awards. Just to give you a brief on today's masterclass. This masterclass will focus on leadership is not a new skill, so why are we getting it so wrong? An employee's relation with his or her manager is the most important factor in employee engagement, and we know that engaged employees are happier and way more productive than disengaged ones. It is also known that one of the leading causes for employees leaving the organization is poor leadership. Hence the old saying, people quit their bosses, not their jobs. There are few organizations which have some level of leadership development program in place. However, in a recent Brandon Hall benchmarking survey, 75% of respondents said that leadership programs were not very effective. Many organizations and individuals struggle with the fact that there is no widely agreed skill set for management. There are strategies that we can put into place, as there are organizations across the world that are also getting it right. So what do these organizations do differently? In this 30-minute masterclass, you will learn the current environment, why is transformation necessary, strategies for reinventing the status quo, key elements in developing the right leadership program for your organization, and world-class examples. To present this session, we have the privilege of having with us Gail Mehti, Service Design and Delivery Manager, Asia Pacific for Skillsoft. Gail joined Skillsoft in 2007 and has been involved in the training industry for over 15 years. Her role is predominantly to work with industry clients to define, design, and implement successful training solutions, providing organizations with the right tools to achieve learning success. Gail has a strong background in the Australian Qualification Training Framework and SFIA. The sponsors for today's webinar for helping us make this program possible are Center for Creative Leadership, Pearson Talent Lens, Sum Total Systems of Skillsoft Company, Great Lakes Institute of Management, and Wilson Learning. We have saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of the masterclass. For those watching the live masterclass, you can submit questions at any time during the presentation through the Q&A section. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows. So without any further delay, I am going to hand over the microphone to Gail to start this exciting session. Over to you, Gail.
Thank you very much, Shashi, and welcome, and thank you everybody for joining us here today. It has truly been an amazing response to a very special topic that just this response shows is true to all of our hearts. Today's agenda is a really simple one. We're going to take a look at the current environment, have a look at the message behind today's topic, leadership is not a new skill, then look at some strategies for reinventing the status quo and what needs to change, and we'll have a sneak peek to see what others are doing. Today I'll be asking a number of questions. I know I don't want you to respond to those questions, but take this opportunity to reflect on the questions and really think about your organisation and what these questions and their responses mean to you. My first question for you is, how would you rate your current leadership development programs? Now, are they working? And did they used to work well and you got great results from them, but for some reason they're just not working as well as they used to? Then my next question to you is, how skilled are your leaders to lead your organization today? And how skilled and ready are your leaders to lead your organization into the future? Here are some stats for you from a 2015 Brandon Hall, the State of Leadership Development Study. In that report, in response to the questions I've just asked, 36% of organisations describe their leadership development practices as below average or even poor. 51% of organisations said that their leaders are not skilled to effectively lead their organisations today. So that's just over half. But the real kicker and the real surprise was that 71% said that their leaders are not ready to lead their organisations into the future. Now, if you think about the key critical leadership development priorities for your organisation in the next 12 months, what are they? Do you really know what they are? And have you had the opportunity to sit down and work them out? The rest of the world, and this is based again on the same report from Brandon Hall, are saying that the top list of critical leadership development priorities in the next 12 months for their organisations are building a culture of performance, increasing employee engagement, and attracting and retaining talent. Now, these are some really important topic areas, and you think these topics play such a significant role in our organisation's growth, in the success of our organisations, and in our ability to be able to stay in front of our competition. So what it does mean is that if we put off leadership development, especially in these areas, we are in essence hindering the ability for growth in our business performance. Now, if we ignore the transformation of leadership development, it actually means we're ignoring, optimizing, and sustaining our business growth. And if we are then opening a door for our competitors to get in. So we've come to our title for today, and it's not a title that I came upon by mistake. As Service Design and Delivery Manager for the Asia Pacific region, working in this industry for such a long time, it's a title that has developed because it's a question I get asked so often. So we're going to sit back, relax, take a really deep breath, and we're going to look at the current environment and try and get an understanding on what has changed. One thing that has changed, and nobody will argue this point, is our environments today are way more complex than they used to be. How many of you have been working in industry for over 20 years? And, you know, I've put that picture of that phone there because many of you would remember that type of phone in the office. The next question is, what did you do in the workplace before computers and email? I remember being really, really busy. I can't remember busy doing what, given that email and technology now consumes almost every element of my everyday. But I do remember that when I went home at night, I closed the office door and my job was done for the day. I couldn't be contacted. It was a shut door. It was closed office. I went home and then, you know, spent family time and you know, there was no way for people to contact me, to call me, to email me, because none of that existed. Then my third question for you is, what's the one word that most people say when you ask them how are you or how they are? And the one word response that you'll get is busy. And we don't just say we're busy. We are actually more busy today and more active today, and there's more demands today than there have ever been in history in the workplace. Now, for those of you on the line that have lived and breathed in the industry for 20 plus years, the next part of the presentation is going to be a little bit of a walk through history. And for the younger ones on the phone, I actually hope that you get a couple of aha moments, that you might actually start to see why some of the processes and the leadership and development programs that you currently have in play perhaps aren't working as well as you've been told they used to work. Here's another question for you. How much has your role changed in the last 5 years, even the last 1 year? How would that compare to your parents when they were working at your age in industry? What about your grandparents? I know my grandfather learnt one skill when he was 15. He was still pretty much doing that same piece of work when he retired at 65. How much And how many of you know, and you know, just looking at what's coming down the line, how much is your role going to change over the next 12 months? And do we all agree that our jobs are no longer one skill for life? Our roles are changing dramatically, and there's no getting around that. There's no getting away from that. It's to the point where the people that are in the roles, and you would have seen that just from the previous questions, we ourselves in these roles are finding it hard to keep up, let alone the people who we task with managing those roles. Technology, instead of lightening the load, and I remember the promise of the paperless office many, many years ago, has just added to the load. We can now be contacted at any time and in any place and by anybody, and the demands for new skills and knowledge can now be classed as a daily activity. A child born today, their job when they're ready for the workforce does currently not exist. Even thinking about children that are around the 10 to the 14 age group, their jobs when they reach the workforce probably at this point do not even exist. There is a global specialist skills shortage, and I'm hearing this more and more and more in your region. Now, here's a question for you. Have you taken the time to read the job requirements for an open position recently? I often scan through our local newspaper looking for the open positions just to see the types of skills people are looking for. What I'm finding is that some of the skills and experience they're looking for in one person, I wouldn't even put money on that person existing on the planet, let alone out there looking for a change of scenery. So even if the specialist skills are out there, chances are they've already been snapped up. And if you are under the impression that you will buy skills in, which is what I used to hear a lot around 10 years ago, you're either going to find yourself in a constant recruiting mode and or even extremely disappointed. To support this, unemployment figures in India and across the world are hitting an all-time low. According to the Trading Economics Global, the India unemployment rate is currently at an all-time low and is expected to trend around this rate right up to the year 2020. And then just to add to the mix, we have globalization. So 20 years ago, if you had have said to me in the future, I'll be traveling to and working side by side with people in Asia, in India, I'll be reporting through to the USA, I probably would have laughed because that concept just seemed so far away. The world back then seemed so huge. Technology has made globalization really easy, and it's common practice now for us to have leaders and managers of people sitting in a completely different country. We've got time zone differences, we've got cultural differences, we've got lack of visibility. These are all now new elements that managers in today's day have to deal with, and we as learning and development professionals, we have to start building that into our considerations when we're designing our programs. Now, here's another player that may not have considered, and that is the changing role of learning and development. And this one has snuck up on us. There's a time when learning and development, we would receive a training budget. We'd create a nice little training calendar that had a couple of events on it each month. These things would just keep rolling over each year. People would attend, they ate the food, they received their certificate of completion, and all was really good and everyone was really happy in the world. But that was before our environments became really complex. Now, all that stuff we've already talked about, our ever-changing roles, technologies, skill shortages, increases in the demands of new skills and knowledge on a daily basis, and then on average, and this is actually an old chart that I've been using for a couple of years, so I have a feeling the numbers would be even lower now, the learning and development staff ratio has dropped quite significantly. So for all the learning and development people on the call today, if you feel like your head is spinning on a daily basis, there's a very, very good reason for that. The demands on learning and development are up 1,000%, but the resources are ridiculously lower. So if the demand for new skills and knowledge is changing rapidly, tell me, how does learning and development keep up with what training is required? How can you possibly know everything that everybody needs, and how could you possibly determine all of that at the beginning of the financial year? And just think of the question I asked you earlier about the changing roles and how much they change just in a 12-month period. Then, how do you make sure everyone gets all the training they need when and where they need it? It's no longer effective to put it into a calendar and expect that everybody's going to need the training at the same time on the same day. For an organisation to be able to achieve its goals and for the business units to be able to achieve their goals and the individuals to achieve theirs, how do you know, and then how do you get the funding for the training? How does that compare to the old way? There's a new player in the learning and development field, and that's procurement. We are now faced with a situation where more often than not, we need to demonstrate the value of our training programs before we can even receive the first cent. And then there is a displacement of spending, and I'm not saying these type of dollars happen in all organisations. I have seen in the last couple of years a shift, but this Person by Deloitte report certainly shows us that there's a really huge displacement of spending on the executive leaders compared to the first and middle level leaders. And think about where the majority of your organisation sits. I recently had the pleasure of working with an organisation who run award-winning learning and development programs, but what they noticed was behaviours were only changing in pockets of the organisation. They couldn't get those behaviours to filter through. So when we did an analysis on the programs, those programs were only touching 7% of the leadership and development team. Their expectation was, because they started at the top, that those skills would filter down, that message would filter down. But it doesn't work that way. 93% of the audience were not being touched by the training. Imagine if we turned that around and 93% of the audience were all reading from the same pages, they're all reading the same book, they're all telling the same story. It would be very, very, very different. And that's the strategy, and that's the program that we're now looking at. How do we now work with the majority of the audience rather than the minority, and with the hope that it will filter through? And then finally, we make assumptions. Now, assumptions based on how the workplace used to be, because they used to work. How many of you have heard the phrase, leaders are born leaders? And yes, some people have the personality to become leaders, but they still need some element of leadership development. Then, career development means becoming a leader. Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because people want to progress and grow in their careers, that they want to become leaders and managers. I did a presentation to an IT group only a couple of months ago, 150 IT people in the room. I said to them, how many of you want to become leaders and managers? I had 2 people put their hand up. That's 1 in 75. It doesn't mean they don't want to develop in their careers. It just means they don't want to develop into leaders and managers. Then we make another mistake and we say, okay, long tenure, if you've been here for a really long time, then that makes good leaders. That used to work. That used to work 20 years ago when the skills weren't changing, when the development of the people and what they needed to learn didn't change. Long tenure and that promotion was often the recognition to that individual to say thank you for your loyalty. Now, with today's environment, with the complexity in today's environment, it's really important that we recruit leaders for their leadership capability and not for their loyalty. There's also another assumption that we make, that good technical skills make good leaders. Yes, again, maybe 20, 30 years ago, but how many of you have recently seen or have seen in your lifetime that really good and very competent person promoted into a leadership role with zero development or training, and they fail miserably. We set them up to fail by thinking that because they're competent and they're good technically, that they're also going to be a good leader or manager. And think about, too, what that does to your organization's morale and what it does to your productivity. And more often than not, these people, when we put them into these positions, they'll eventually leave the organization. We lose really, really high competence. And our last assumption is that all leaders need the same development at the same time on the same competencies, and our programs resemble checklists. You know, we have to step away from that and understand that people are going to need development at different levels because they're individuals. We can't put them all in as one whole group and expect that we're going to be able to do a one-size-fits-all. These are individuals. They need different levels of training based on their experiences, based on how much they're going to use that skill, based on when they're going to require that skill. Now, these assumptions are not wrong, and in most cases they used to work, but that was many, many years ago. So it's really important that we see that transformation and we understand what that transformation actually means. Now, strategies for reinventing the status quo. It's out with the old and it's in with the new. Let's change the way we do things. Let's transform with our environment. Let's transform with our business. Now, this diagram is based on the Herman-Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Now, many of you may have already used it. You may have seen it before. There's not many presentations I do where I don't actually use it in some format. He developed this curve in 1885. This information's been around for a long time. And in his hypothesis, he realized that if we don't reinforce learning regularly over a period of time, that in 30 days, a learner can retain or lose up to 90% of that information. They can actually lose up to 50% of that information in the first hour. So by lunchtime today, there's every chance that all of the people on today's call will only retain about 50% of this presentation. If we can build in to these 30 days at least 6 elements of learning to reinforce that learning, we can change that retention from 10% to 90%. Now, if you're looking at leadership training, you're looking at changing behaviours in leadership, you tell me where and when are you going to see behavioural changes. Are you going to see it with 10% retention or with 90% retention? Now, I want you to have a look at this diagram here, the one on the right. This is from the Skillsoft 8 Phases of Workplace Learning white paper. I want you to have a look at that, and if you can read it, if you can't, I'm quite happy to send it through to the team after today's session. I want you to tell me where you've had a bad training experience. Where did that program start and where did it finish? I've seen so many training programs tagged as not effective, and it's usually not the training program's fault. The training program would have been effective if it was complete, but most of these programs will start at the tell me, the show me, they might have a little bit of let me, and then they stop. So they're actually only covering 3 phases of the 8 phases of workplace learning. Sorry, I'll just skip one there. Now, we've already touched on the subject of the changing role of learning and development, so let me tell you the days of spoon-feeding our learners with training calendars, with nice lunches, certificates of attendance, and all that type of thing are truly behind us. Learning and development must now be the role of the whole organisation. The old saying, it takes a village to raise a child, well, it takes a village to develop an organisation. The role of L&D in today's day is to facilitate the learning requirements. Now, I want you to think about the conductor at the front of the orchestra. He doesn't need to know how to play each instrument. He doesn't teach each musician how to play their instrument. He only knows how to read the sheet of music in front of him. It's then the combined roles of the music teacher, the musician, and the composer to make sure it all sounds fantastic when it comes together at the end. So here's the challenge. We've got limited budget and time. How do we make learning available when and where our learners need it? How do we ensure that the program is also easy to access and easy to maintain? And how do we track and measure return on investment? Leadership and development should be happening all the time. And here's a model I'm working with an organization with currently. And if you ever get a chance, it's based very similar to the leadership philosophies behind the GE Way. And if you ever get a chance, look up the GE Way or GE Leadership on YouTube. There's some wonderful videos out there. In this particular example, we've structured a program that incorporates the continuous learning model over a 5-year period. What's that going to do for our retention? What's that going to do for our continuous learning? What's that going to do for our motivation to be able to make sure that people are continuously improving? It's also giving us the opportunity to make sure that people are ready for their next role before they're given the next role. We're actually making sure that they are at that level before they are given the role so they can really hit the ground running. And, of course, that then has less of an impact on loss in productivity. To be able to develop training models, you know, it's okay to say, okay, we can have all this training, but where do we put it? My recommendation to you is create a learning space. Look up the whole concept of MOOCs. Have somewhere where it's a landing page. The learner does not need to know where those resources are kept. Links and technology, make technology your friend. Use those links to take them out to documents, to take them out to people, to take them out to events, to take them to the intranet, to your network, anywhere that those resources are. That means then that it's one place for you to maintain and to be able to keep that transformation of that learning up to speed. If that sounds like a lot of work, it doesn't have to be. There are many learning portals out there already. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Many of our Skillsoft customers are currently using our Advantage Series portals just like this one for this exact purpose. It already exists with some customization. It can be up and running in a couple of weeks. That becomes their learning space. Now, if you take one key takeaway away from today's session, I want it to be this. Self-paced does not mean no structure. The old saying, build it and they will come, does not apply to learning. Build it, make it relevant to them, lead them to it, and they will come applies to learning. Design your programs and direct the learner to the learning space and create the habit for learning. Use tools that are already in front of you. If they're too busy, use their calendar. Plant the training into their calendar, or better than that, encourage the learners to plant the training in their calendar. So I just wanted to step through this with you. This is a typical day in the life of a manager. We'll call him Bob, and this is Bob's typical day. Now, Bob heads to the gym early at 6 a.m. He's not into the loud music, so he puts his headphones on. He listens to an audio summary that's on his iPhone. Then on his way to work, he enrolls the services of his personal motivator through his MP3 player, Tim Sanders. And at work for his early morning coffee, he reads an executive blueprint that's come through on his 5 at 5 news feed. He finds the information very, very pertinent to his weekly team meeting at 10 o'clock. So he takes the 10 key discussion points from that into the meeting, and he uses that to form his agenda. Then at 12 o'clock, a seniors manager meeting, they have a guest speaker. It's through a video. It's through another learning resource. It takes them through a 7-minute keynote that sets the meeting up and sets the context for the meeting. Bob has a new hire interview at 2 o'clock, so since he hasn't conducted an interview in a while, so he watches a short 10-minute vignette on effective interviewing techniques just to sharpen his skills. Then at 3, he's got a couple of performance appraisals, so he downloads an online job aid template from the intranet. Then at 4, he meets with his Welsh Way leadership team. The colleagues are in Sydney, Melbourne, Mumbai and London. They discuss their week's learnings and the application for their working week. Now, here's something for you. Bob has accessed all of this from his learning space, and this can be a typical day. Think about your day and think about where you go during a day and often not even leaving your desk. Not once, though, did Bob have to log into an LMS. All of his resource activity has been logged through the LMS, though, it's all been tracked. Now, just to finish, and I know I've gone a couple of minutes over, so I do apologise. I just want to say that leadership is not a new skill, but it has transformed, and the development of our leaders and the way that we do things has to transform with it. It's an exciting time to let go of the business as usual. There's no such thing as business as usual anymore. That is history. It's time to think outside the box, and you have to make technology your friend. Use the knowledge, use the skills and the expertise of all those people around you. You don't have to know how to play every single instrument in the band. You are the conductor of the orchestra, and it's really, really time for you to start pulling all those musicians together and start to create some really, really nice music in the leadership and development field. So, Shashi, thank you very, very much. I think that was the quickest 20 minutes I've ever had in my life.
Thank you so much, Gail, for presenting this wonderful session and sharing your insights. So now we have started receiving questions from our participants, and we would like to take the first question. First question coming up is by Sunanda Rao, and her question is related to learning culture. So her question is, we have online training modules, but people seldom go to it as they feel they are over-occupied with their work. So how can they make it more effective?
This is something that I'm seeing a lot. We've come through the transition of online learning, and there was a misconceived concept that you could put online learning out on the table and people would just come in and they would use it, and it would be a really nice, happy place. That doesn't work. The online training modules need to be part of the solution. There needs to be programs that are structured, and if you remember that 8 phases of workplace learning, the online component is just one element of that. If you can put that into even a very simple one-page program guide that would say to them, okay, on day 1 or on week 1, we need you to complete this, and at the end of the week, we want you to get together in your peer groups, and I've seen peer networking and peer learning such a strong element in successful training programs. Put the onus back on the learners to learn from each other. Just make sure you put some structure around it. Self-paced does not work on its own. There has to be some cadence around it. There has to be a structure around it. It has to have a what's in it for them.
Thank you so much, Gail, for answering this question. I'm sure Sunanda is going to use the skills which you have shared. So next question coming up is by Pooja, and her question is, in a world where everyone seeks equality, how is the perception of leadership likely to change in the coming years?
I think if we change the culture within our organisations so as people understand that leadership is everybody's business. Leadership, it's not about whether you have a leadership title or a manager title. And I mentioned the GE way and those videos that are available on YouTube. If you have leadership coming and you start training leadership at induction when people first walk into your organization, and you just train leadership continuously right through to the day that person leaves or retires from the organization. Leadership is about, if you're not a leader, but if you're a person that is led, it is still really, really important that you know how to be led well. That is your role in the leadership element of the organization. Leadership is all the way through. It doesn't matter about the title. So if you can start to create that message and drive that message and really make that a part of your culture, that leadership and equality, that is not going to be an issue. If one of the other things that I can mention too is create a self-development, start to look at how you create a self-development organization. Have the opportunities for people to develop themselves in positions that they aspire to, and have themselves ready for that role should that role come up. That's not a guarantee that that role will be given to them, but it means that they can put their hand up and they're going to be in a good place to be able to be considered for that position.
Thank you, Gail, for answering this question. Very well said. So we have received multiple questions, but we are running out of time. So we'll be able to take only two questions. So we would request you to answer remaining questions offline.
Yes, that would be.
So
I would be honoured.
Great. So our next question coming up is by Amandeep Kaur, and her question is ROI, easily used term but difficult to measure. How effective in leadership development programs we can measure ROI considering the fast changing environment within an organization context?
I think it's really important that we don't lose the whole key performance indicators, that we don't lose key result areas especially for leadership. That becomes the operational task, but we also need to look at building into those KPIs people development. We need to build into that leadership, even using 360-degree feedback, understanding what the gaps are in the organisation as far as leadership, doing, training needs analysis, looking at your learning strategy. Where is it that you want to go into the future? How are you going to get there? What capability do your leaders need to be able to get there? If you're developing that capability and you can see your organisation start to head towards that goal, that to me is a measure. Put milestones in place. Make sure that you also take a snapshot of the time now, because that's going to be your yardstick. That's going to be everything that it gets measured against from here until it is where you are that you want to be.
Absolutely agree with you, Gail. So the last question which we will take today is by Atul, and his question is, with the millennials soon getting into leadership roles, how do you see leadership development unfolding for them?
Oh, millennials, how exciting. What an exciting time we're in, and the transformation of watching these really exciting and energetic people coming up through the line. I see millennials leading more as a network and as a team, and not as individuals. And I think if we start to create leadership networks within our organisation, even outside of our organisation, you'll see that these people, you've only got to see the way that they interact socially and with technology. You'll see that they will begin to embrace that. And when I said earlier in the presentation that globalization and technology has made the world a smaller place, I think that our millennials are going to make it an even smaller place. It's going to be a place where they're not going to be fazed about working with and networking with leaders that perhaps might be sitting in Europe or in the USA or in Australia even. They are going to embrace that. They're going to embrace technology. And we just have to make sure that they are given the right opportunity to really understand what a leader's role is, and that is to lead people through a vision on a mission for the organisation to be able to achieve success.
Thank you, Gail, for answering Atul's question. And with this question and answer session, we are going to wrap up today's masterclass. Wow, what a session. We are still receiving questions from our participants, but unfortunately we are getting out of time, and we have to take remaining questions offline. So once again, we thank today's masterclass partners, Center for Creative Leadership, Pearson Talent Lens, Sum Total Systems, a Skillsoft company, Great Lakes Institute of Management, and Wilson Learning. Finally, our special thanks to Gail, the speaker for this masterclass, for her time and invaluable information she has shared with us today. And I would like to thank everybody in the masterclass audience for participating in today's presentation. We will come back to you with many more. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you, Shashi.